Watched that video a few times this week, trying to make sure it didn't affect me too much before I got up here and spoke. Um, Something powerful when you hear words like that come from a teenager's mouth. I'm not sure exactly why, if it's the fact that we all expect high schoolers, like that first girl said, to be happy. It's supposed to be some of the best years of your life. You're around, hundreds and thousands of your peers. There should be no difficulty in making friends. Yet for some reason, for some kids, in fact for a lot of kids I think in these days, it's very difficult to make friends, to make real friends, those real kind of relationships, the kind of people that when you're around you feel like you're at home. And I think that's kind of why we're focusing so much in this series on relationships, especially as Christians. It's almost like we have a responsibility to make sure nobody feels alone. Nobody should feel without hope because we have the greatest source of hope in our lives. We have Jesus Christ. And it's something that if we really believe in the gospel message, then that should be inspiration enough to want to share that with those who have no hope, who have no real connecting relationships. And I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult to talk about it because every week, we don't just talk about the things on the inside of us. We talk about it, if we do talk about the things on the inside, we're talking about it because we need to change, we need to build ourselves up so that way on the outside, we can work and pour into other people's lives. And that can be a scary thought sometimes, pouring into other people's lives. I think there's this natural fear that we get when we think about giving ourselves away in order to make sure and look out for other people. I think there's this fear that then what's going to happen to me? Who's going to look after me? Who's going to make sure that I'm taken care of if I don't make sure that I'm taking care of myself? And see, the verse we read this morning from Romans talks about that's not sort of the attitude that we should have. I mean, first of all, if you read throughout the Bible, the number one person we can always rely on to take care of us is God. We can always rely on God. And so that's reason enough to step out on faith and give beyond what you think you're capable of giving. But secondly, look at the life of Jesus Christ. Ultimately, we know that the people of Israel turned on him and crucified him. But if you look outside of the fact, when Jesus wasn't saying some controversial things, that if they weren't true, were kind of blasphemous statements. The whole, before Abraham was, I am, the proclamation of Godhood. Yeah, if anybody else says that besides Jesus Christ, run. But when he wasn't saying things like that, when he wasn't flipping their whole idea of religion upside down, when Jesus was just being relational, man, he drew people to himself. He attracted people. And the reason why is because when they looked at Jesus, when people looked at Jesus, when they came and saw Jesus, there was this hope, this reality that they were going to be built up. They were going to be better off. They were going to be poured into as people from Jesus Christ. And they knew that this relationship was a positive thing for them when they came to him. And see, that's the spirit that we need to exude. That's the spirit of Jesus Christ, the mind of Jesus Christ, of when people approach you, what's going to be their thought? What's going to be how they feel? Are you going to be the kind of person that when you approach, they're going to be like, oh no, I'm going to have to sit here and pray after this meeting with this person? Or are you going to be the kind of person that when you approach, there's that ease, that comfort, and that joy of knowing that their day is going to be a little bit brighter because they came across your path? I know some of us have a real difficulty with that. Some of us are maybe a little cynical. We're a little hard on the outside. But the fact of the matter is that this is a biblical mandate. This is not an option. This is not something based upon our character traits. It's not something that's based upon our personalities. The fact of the matter is God wants us all to have that compassion and that love. So today we're going to start part 3 of our series, The Good Life, talking about how to be a people builder. And so I'd like to begin today with a little interaction. This is one of those things that some people in the crowd love and a lot of people hate, but it's going to be really easy. I just need a show of hands. How many of you have ever taken some sort of music lesson in your lifetime? How many of you have ever taken some sort of music? Wow, it's pretty good. Any swimming lessons? I grew up here in Leesburg, so I took mine over to Ida Lee. Okay. How about golf lessons? If you've ever seen me golf, you know I've never taken a lesson in my life. Any dance classes? What about cooking lessons? Thankfully, I was blessed with a wife who can cook very well, so no need there. This one's popular in the area, horseback riding. How many of you all ever taken horseback riding? This is kind of horse country here, and especially Middleburg. Tennis? Some tennis lessons. Public speaking? Scuba diving? That one I did. All right, fellow divers. Underwater basket weaving. That one was just to see if such a thing actually exists, or to find the people who have difficulty with honesty. Either or. But you get the idea. Our society believes a lot in continuing education, and especially I think it's a big part of our culture. You know, in our culture, in America, but also I think it's very much brought out here in Northern Virginia, the idea of sort of self-promoting, self-building, kind of building yourself up. And a big part of that is continuing education, whether it be in a particular area of your expertise or in a way that kind of broadens your horizon. Our area believes in continuing education. Sometimes we take community college classes, online courses. With technology and communications being the way it is today, the opportunities are seemingly boundless now. But there's one thing I think a lot of us don't take lessons for. I don't know if you can go to a classroom and take lessons for, but it's one of the most important things of all in our lives, and that's lessons on relationships, in how to build good relationships, deep relationships. There's classes on how to build business relationships, on marketing, that sort of thing, being able to sit there and through social networking, again, to self-promote. There's those kinds of lessons out there, but I'm talking about the real kind of relationships where you're open, you're honest, it's almost like to the level of family with other people. And so that's really what this series is kind of all about, and it's such an important lesson for us, because as Christians, if we are going to be people who share the gospel, relationships are key, they are foundational, they are necessary to do that. I know there are people out there with the gift of evangelism. We're talking like the Billy Graham types that, man, they can just go up and meet someone for the first time and they share the gospel, and that person has a life-changing experience. They know Jesus right then, right there, just through a first-time conversation. I think for the majority of us, and that's what the gift of evangelism in my mind looks like, I think for the majority of us, the way we evangelize is through our everyday relationships. And the level of trust, the level of faithfulness that is required when you tell somebody about Jesus Christ, for them to be open and kind of receptive towards that, especially in our post-Christian culture here in America, as we're moving more and more towards where Europe currently is now, relationships are going to be key in order to get through some of those barriers now that have been built up over centuries of here in the gospel message, as well as some atrocities that have been committed by the church. We can't pretend like we're all innocent in that area. But today, towards that end of relationships, we're looking at another key part of building solid relationships, and that you'll find it again in 1 Corinthians 13:4. We studied the first part of this verse last week. We're going to study the second part of this verse this week. Last week, love is patient was our topic, talking about how we need to give up the right of anger and bitterness towards people. But today, we're looking at the second part of that phrase. Love is patient, and love is kind. Kindness. Showing kindness to one another. One of the things that you learn about when you travel the world and do cross-cultural ministry and stuff, you start to get an appreciation for your own culture. Back when I was in college and doing mission trips, and I was talking to people from other countries, and I was like, well, what are some things that, what are some first impressions that people get of Americans when they first meet us? And one guy told me, he's like, oh, well, Americans are very gregarious. And I was, kind of second, third year college. I wasn't sure if I was insulted or complimented just now. So I was like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, they're just so friendly and open and warm to people when you meet them, like almost to a creepy level. Like you meet them and they're like, hey, how you doing? And then like they like to hug a lot too. And so one thing I didn't realize about Americans was, for a lot of the world, Americans as people, maybe not so much our government, but our citizens, our people, are throughout the world seen as very kind people, very warm people. We're actually you can kind of see that melting pot effect over time as you see all the different sort of character traits we've picked up from all the cultures that make up our country. We have this warmness about us, but we also have a very Western European way of being very much, almost like A-type personalities. We're very much, about punctuality and scheduling and things like that. But there is a warmness to us. And I think that plays to our advantage growing up here. We're culturally sort of inclined, most of us, to understand the appreciation, especially if you grew up in the South, the appreciation of being warm, being hospitable. And that's important because love is kind. Love is kindness. And today, the way we're looking at it is, if you look at the Phillips translation of this verse, they translate it as love looks for a way of being constructive. Love looks for a way of being constructive. And so, what we're looking at today is how to be people builders. How to be people builders. Romans 15:2 says we should consider the good of our neighbor and build up his character. So the question we need to ask ourselves is how? How do we build the people in our life? In this message today, the good thing about it is it's for everybody. If you have any sort of relationship with anybody, then this is a good message for us. Parents, husbands, wives, business partners, employers, employees. Anytime that you have for a school teacher, if you are a volunteer with any sort of program, anywhere that you have a relationship with people, you have the opportunity to build those people up. And today we're going to look at 4 things you can give people that will bring out the best in them and build them up. And remember, we're talking about kindness here. And so we're talking about kindness, not criticism, giving people what they need and not necessarily what we feel they deserve. That's a very important point. Oftentimes we lash out in anger and criticism. We oftentimes feel like that person deserves the brunt of our criticism. But the honest thing is, we're talking about things that people need. And you think of it, like we said, in the terms of Christ Jesus, He came down giving us what we need, which is what grace comes from, giving us gifts that are undeserved. He gave us what we needed and not what we deserved, which is where mercy plays in. So giving people what they need, not what they deserve. First, if you want to be a people builder, give them a personal challenge. Give them a personal challenge. Ephesians 4:1 says, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. That's a personal challenge from Paul. Paul is urging people to make their life count. He's challenging them. He's giving them a goal. He's saying, don't waste your life. A famous book by John Piper. Don't waste your life. Be all that God made you to be. Why does Paul say this? Because we all need people in our lives who challenge us. Challenge us because that's where growth comes from. And if you're challenging people in a positive way and causing them to grow, well, lo and behold, you're a people builder. I think we all know that if we were kind of to ourselves, there's very few people who have the ability to self-motivate on the level that they can get the same kind of progress as they would if they had a close friend who challenged them, held them accountable, and urged them on, exhorted them. For the longest time, I'm going to use 2 examples here from sports. So if you don't watch football, I'm sorry. But for a long time, a franchise called the Green Bay Packers were a losing franchise. Terrible team. Pre-Super Bowl era is what we're talking about here. Long, long time ago. I'm sorry if you were alive then and I just accidentally insulted you. But during much of these years, they only had a 25% winning percentage. It was terrible. It was one of those teams that when you went up against them, your team was guaranteed to win. You loved having them on your schedule. Then they hired a coach by the name of Vince Lombardi. This guy was the epitome of a people builder. And his quotes are used all the time, his motivational speeches, the ideas. He'd go in there, and what he did with his team is he challenged them, gave them a goal. And it turned him into one of the most winning franchises, one of the best dynasties in the history of football. They won 5 national championships, including the very first 2 Super Bowls. Lombardi made his name off of being a people builder, so much so that they named the Super Bowl trophy after him. I had to tell Doug that, of course, I had to throw in my story of my franchise that I root for, the Steelers, in that up the time, they were one of the oldest franchises in football, but from the 30s until the 70s, they had 2 winning seasons. They were the epitome of terrible. But many of you who started following football in the 1970s knows that the Steelers, along with a couple other teams, became one of the powerhouses of NFL. And it's because these coaches invested in the players as people. They built them up. One of the things you have to do to challenge people is find out what motivates them. What motivates them? A book we've been quoting a lot this week, Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus, John Gray writes, men are motivated and empowered when they feel needed. Not to be needed is a slow death for a man. Women are motivated and empowered when they feel cherished. Most men have little awareness of how important it is to a woman to feel supported by someone who cares. Probably one of the reasons that men get the sort of label of they need to fix everything. Whenever there's a problem, they need to fix it. And sometimes the communication breakdown, which is famous and a lot of people know about, is when women come to men with their problems, they're not necessarily looking for a fix. They're looking for support. Of course, guys oftentimes fail and still try to fix things. But figure out what motivates the person. And these are just general rules of thumb. Everybody's different as a person. And so getting to know them through relationships helps oftentimes. You can't just often meet someone and judge them by, their gender, their age, how they dress. This is how insurance companies work. This is not how Jesus Christ works. He doesn't work by just demographic information. He wants us to get to know the people, know who they are, know what makes them tick. And then you have the means by which to challenge them. There are people in your life that God wants to use you to bring out the best in, to be a people builder, to inspire them to become what He knows they can be. Well, how do we know what God wants us to be? Personally, we'll take an assessment of your abilities and your strengths. 1 Peter 4:10 says, God has given each of you some special abilities. Be sure to use them to help each other, passing on to others God's many kinds of blessings. We've been given many different kinds of abilities, and oftentimes what God has called us to be usually lies in those areas of which we are strongest, usually lies in our strengths. Occasionally, God will challenge us, call us to faithfully step out in something that maybe we're a little weak in. But I found that most oftentimes, the fulfilling calling that God has in your life lies in where He has naturally gifted you with talents and abilities. One of the hot markets today is the career planning market, especially in this time when jobs can be hard to come by. Going to somebody who can kind of help you analyze who you are as a person, maybe you heard of temperament analysis or competency tests, capability consultants. People will spend a lot of money. Sometimes corporations will shell out big bucks to have people analyze possible candidates, current employees, to kind of analyze who they are as people, where their strengths lie, in order so that they can maximize the opportunities they have out of these people. The Bible teaches us that's what the church is supposed to kind of do. That's one of the goals of the church. If somebody asked me to describe our church, I would say life development. And it's actually kind of in our mission statement. Our mission statement is discover, develop, and deploy. We help people discover that relationship with Christ. We help develop their natural talents and God-gifted abilities so that we can deploy out into the world and share the gospel. We're here to be people builders. That's ultimately why we're here. It's why we congregate. We're not just here to see old friends and sing and throw money in the offering plate and pray. There's actually a goal here in mind when we get together, is to sit there and look at the Bible, see what the message is bringing, so that we can look at our own lives and say, okay, well, where can I build myself up here, and how can I help build those around me with what I've learned? So ask yourself this morning, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much time do you spend thinking about challenging others? If you have a child or a teenager in the house, probably naturally a little higher. But how much time do you spend thinking about drawing out the strengths that other people have? If you're going to be a people builder to bring out the best in the people around you, we need to give them a personal challenge. Second is give them complete confidence. Give them complete confidence. Romans 15:2 says, we who are strong in the faith ought to help the weak in order to build them up in the faith. We all need confidence. When somebody believes in you and really believes in you, not just says they believe in you, but when you actually have someone come to you, approach you with a task that needs to be done because you feel like they're coming to you because you're the person that can get this done, it gives you courage. It gives you courage. One of the most dreaded words in all of baseball is a 4-letter word that begins with Y, and it's called the yips. No one can really tell you what the yips are, but you know all the signs when someone has it. And the best definition people can give about the yips, typically you'll see this with fielders. When they throw the ball, suddenly guys who were dead on accurate can't get it anywhere near target anymore. There's no physical ailment. There's no injury that happened. It's just simply there's a mental block now. And many people believe it relies on confidence. I heard one baseball manager, professional baseball, major league manager, say that his job is less about teaching and more about being a psychologist almost with these guys, to try and get in their brain and give them the confidence they need to get the job done. Because when you have confidence, you have the ability to make those snap decisions. You have the ability to make the right call. You don't second guess yourself. But when you start having a lack of confidence, suddenly you need to overanalyze every little thing that you're doing to make sure you're doing it correctly. Look what Jesus said to Peter. Peter's name was Simon, but Jesus changed it to Petros, rock. Jesus says, Peter, you're going to be a rock. I'm giving you a new name. And the thing about this is if you ever read Peter's story, even after Jesus was resurrected, he was anything but a rock at times. He was Mr. Impulsive, Mr. Foot in Mouth. He was the guy that he didn't think about things. He just made snap decisions, and sometimes it made him in trouble. Remember in the garden, he drew out his sword and cut a guy's ear off. Not realizing, because he was being impulsive at the time, not realizing he was trying to impede the very act and series of events that would lead to the salvation of all humanity. But see, Peter, that wasn't on his mind. Peter had something on his mind. He was going to get it done. But Jesus didn't call him out. Jesus didn't berate him. Think about the time when he walked on water and fell. Jesus was always encouraging in those moments. Once God said to a man in the Old Testament, he said, Gideon. And at this point, Gideon's hiding from the enemy army in a wine press. He said, Gideon, you are a mighty man of courage. See, Gideon was hiding at the time because he was afraid. Yet here's God saying, you are a mighty man of courage. What God is saying is, this is what I see in you. This is the potential that I see in you. And you're not acting according to what I know about you. Many times when students come to me and they ask for some counseling about things that they're struggling with, maybe at times they're struggling with, well, what's so bad about what I'm doing? One of the things I tell them is the fact that you're not acting in a way that you deserve. You're not acting in a way that brings the kind of image of you that you deserve. And this is what God is telling Gideon. You're not a coward, Gideon. Don't act like a coward because you don't deserve to be called a coward. You are a man of courage. He knew what was inside him. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, encourage one another and build each other up. This is talking about the power of affirmation. The power of affirmation. Another thing that sometimes teenagers struggle with, and what we need to do when we encourage one another is encourage one another honestly. Don't make stuff up. But if you think, and for some people I know you got to think real hard, but if you think, you can always find something encouraging to say about somebody else. Make it honest. One thing I've noticed about teenagers is growing up in this media-centered world now, is they can detect lies really easily. They know when they're being manipulated. And so if you start trying to sell them something that's not true, it doesn't have much of an effect. But encourage them honestly. One thing I noticed as well is that when you encourage and it's real, that it has a stronger effect. Because one thing that teenagers struggle with, especially if they're trying to change their attitude and change their behaviors, is when they're doing everything they can to change and be good and be better, they slip up, and man, somebody, a parent, a teacher, somebody brings the hammer down on them. And what's hard for them there is that they've really been trying. And when they're not told that they've been noticed that their behavior's changed, and suddenly someone comes and they throw down a nice heavy book of judgment for something they did, it wipes out a lot of the positive progress they've been making. Because in their mind, they're like, well, what's the point? If the point is I'm supposed to act in a way that brings a better image upon myself, but nobody actually notices when I do that, and all they notice when I bring a worse image on myself, why bother with all of that work? Why bother with all of that effort? That's why encouragement not only needs to be real, it needs to be regular. I don't know the balance there is here, but I do know that studies have shown that for every negative, critical thing we say about a person, we got to say a whole lot more positive to kind of balance those scales out. We tend to believe, because we're insecure people at heart, most of us are, there's this insecurity inside of us that if people just poke at it just the right way, man, they can just cripple us inside. And that's why when we hear criticism, we tend to take that more to heart than we do when we hear words of encouragement. That self-doubt plays against being encouraged, and it fuels those negative feelings when we're being criticized. Third, it needs to be recognizable. You ever heard like a compliment and not sure if it was a compliment or not? One time someone told me that they thought I was a model pastor. The problem is, if you look at model in a dictionary, it's a cheap plastic imitation of the real thing. So I think I know what that person was trying to say, so I was pretty sure I was complimented. But again, if you overanalyze things, you can come up with anything. So be honest, and this one, I think especially in our culture of just, I can't think of a better word of it than jocularity. Wanting to be funny, wanting to be, the sort of the guy who wants to be laughed at or laughed with. Sarcasm and things like that, playing jokes has become sort of a thing, especially in younger cultures. And the problem is, sometimes you can play a joke and you do a lot more damage than you thought you actually did. You only meant it as a joke, but they took it pretty seriously. So give yourself an honest rating, 1 to 10, 10 being the best. How good you are encouraging one another. Next, we need to give them honest counsel. We always appreciate a friend who can give us that honest counsel. Proverbs 27:17 says, in the Good News Translation says, people learn from one another as iron sharpens iron. We need to be able to give each other honest counsel. And the Proverbs is full of the need of honest counsel. We need the people that we can trust to give us honest counsel. What I mean by that is not necessarily the counsel that makes us feel good all the time. Sometimes we need that person to come in and says, man, you're doing some dumb things right now. And we need that person that we can trust to say that when they say it, even if the words are kind of harsh, we know they're saying it out of love. They're saying it out of care for us. That's why correction is very powerful, but it's very dangerous stuff. And the three rules you need to follow yourself when you're talking about correction is these 3 rules. Does what I'm getting ready to say, does it need to be said? Does it need to be said? Second is, does it need to be said by me? The third thing is, does it need to be said by me right now? 3 things you got to check off your list there before you open your mouth to correct somebody. Because the problem is, if you correct somebody at the wrong time, or if you're not the person to do the correction, rather than building that person up, you've now helped them fortify and build defenses to keep their attitude and their behavior the same way. So when we go to correct somebody, we give them honest counsel, we need to do an internal assessment of why are we doing this? Is it so that we can feel a little better and point out the faults of others, or is it because we really honestly see some potential in this person and we want to make sure they're not going to mess themselves up? The fourth thing is, when you want to be a people builder, give them full credit. Give them full credit, especially as they grow. And this is especially important with teenagers. Give them credit when they start showing signs of improvement. I grew up in an era, I grew up in the 90s, and so I don't know if it was my generation or maybe the previous generation, but there was this whole thing about, making sure all the kids knew that they were special and they were unique and all this stuff. And studies have shown when you start giving them false praise like that, when you start setting them up like that when there's nothing to really rely on, you actually increase the chance of them suffering depression and anxiety. And the reason why is because you set a standard and told them they're at this standard, but now there's this great fear of letting that standard down. And so there's this extreme fear of failure. And I take this to heart because I suffer through the same thing, man. Failure is one of those things that it's a nightmare for me. I see in other kids too, like that it's very important how people perceive them, that they are the smart and special person they've always been told they are. Probably one of the more important lessons we can teach is not so much that they're smart and special, but that they're accepted, no matter who they are, no matter what's wrong with them. And to teach them, look, man, we all got failings. That's part of being a grown-up, is understanding that. Understanding that, yeah, for most things, odds are there's going to be people better than you at it. That you're going to make mistakes. But the important thing is that you're going to get credit for it, or you're going to get accepted for it. And what we need to do is when they make those bounds to correct those mistakes and those failings, is to give them credit. Credit for the accomplishment. Give them credit for the effort, too. Let them know, hey, I see that you're trying. And I'm not pretending that every teenager that comes to me and cries about, getting in trouble. I mean, sometimes I tell them that, look, I know you say you're trying to change. You're just doing a terrible job at showing it. But when they do actually make that effort, give people credit. When you look at these 4 elements of being a people builder, you give them a personal challenge, give them complete confidence, give them honest counsel, give them full credit. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. And you don't always feel like doing it. But if you want to have, full relationships, godly, Christ-like relationships, you got to do stuff that you don't feel like doing sometimes. And I don't know if in your head right now you're hearing your parents' voice echoing those words, if you got to do stuff you don't want to do sometimes, or perhaps your own voice saying it to your kids from time to time. But it's just a fact of life. It takes unselfishness overall to be a people builder. And I know, like I said at the beginning, that that's a hard thing to do because we want to worry about ourselves. We have those anxieties and those fears. And tell me I'm not the only person, but have you ever thought about a conversation with the person and you start to get riled up? You start to get angry. And the weird thing is, that conversation never actually ever took place. You start getting mad about hypotheticals. You start getting worried about things that really haven't happened. They might happen. But you start tricking yourself and psyching yourself out. Our brain is so powerful, man. If we let it wander down some of these paths, it can really alter the way we feel. And so maybe the key to our anxiety, maybe the key to our emptiness isn't to look within, but is instead to look outside of ourselves. Give of ourselves to other people like Christ gave for us. Maybe then we'll start to find that fulfillment and that peace that we so eagerly desire. That's my prayer for you this morning. So let's go to God and let's pray for exactly that.